Hey, thanks again for joining us. Be sure and drop a star in the chat if this is your first time with us, and then drop a rocket ship in the chat if this is your second, third, fourth, fifth time. Always like to see who is new and who is joining us for the first time. So really appreciate that. Oh, we got some stars in there. Thanks, Tori, a rocket ship. She's been there before. Thanks, Braden. Glad to see you back.
Hey, Braden.
Braden,
First
what
time.
up?
Oh, he's first time here, but long time
Yeah,
fan apparently. So that's great to
HubSpot.
see. Well, why don't you guys give a quick intro of just a little bit of background on yourself before we kick into talking about content teams and what they're up to today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Alex, a co-founder of Omniscient Digital. I live here in New York City with Josh. I see Josh sometimes in person. And we've been running this agency for several years. Before that, I worked at CXL, HubSpot, Workato. I kind of come from an experimentation and analytics background, growth marketing. And yeah, I guess, Allie, you can give more details on the agency. We work with B2B SaaS companies, building out
Yep.
SEO strategies from, technical SEO, keyword research, programmatic SEO. We do content marketing and editorial, digital PR, all of the holistic organic growth activities to drive business results. Yeah, that's me.
All the things. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Allie. Um, New last name Konchar. I recently got married, so in the process of changing that over. One of the three co-founders at Omniscient, along with Alex and David. We met at HubSpot. That's where we worked with Braden, and then I moved on to Shopify. I have a writer background, so I started as a freelancer and then kind of worked my way up, and now run client success and work very closely with our delivery team at Omniscient. So we're really excited to be here talking with you guys about AI and AirOps.
Yeah, thank you. Besides all the smart teams that you guys see at the bottom of the screen there, Allie and Alex talk to a lot of other content leaders as well. So I actually have their magazine here that they put in person. It has like all their interviews with different folks. I made sure to get one of those. So they have a really good perspective on our topic today, which is the state of content teams, how content teams are changing. They talk to a lot of different people in the field. So I knew they would be a great guest to chat about our new research report and our findings, which is the State of Content Teams Report 2025. You can find it at airops.com. And so that's what we're going to be thinking about today is just like, how are metrics changing? How are teams adopting AI? Does our team structures need to change? Should they change? Can they remain the same? And then some other shifts that are reshaping content. So that's what we're going to dive into today. So first off, like, why were we doing this report? What I was thinking about here is I felt a shift, and recently I wrote a piece about content engineering, and it was called The Rise of the Content Engineer, or the 10X Content Engineer. And what I just thought was like, I had this thesis that was, I feel like teams are evolving and that there needs to be a new role to help like stitch some of these AI workflows together. And at the same time, I felt like the pace of change was just pretty rapid and that teams are trying to like struggle and find their place in this. What do you guys think about that thesis in general? And like, I mean, have you felt some of that same tension?
Well, the high level that things are changing, certainly. How they're changing is interesting. And I think one reason research like this is cool is because there's a lot of hot takes and hyperbolic sensationalists, like this is the future, this is dead, this is not the future, right? So you actually get some credible aggregated data from marketing and content leaders in the field. So that's what I found interesting about this. But yeah, how are things changing? I think it's probably, well, we go into this in the research, but like it's a split. Some people are going full AI adoption, some people are dipping their toes, some people are decentralized, some are centralized. It's all over the place.
Yeah, I definitely think the speed at which things are changing is where I've heard and seen people struggle the most because you have um these warring priorities of like speed, execution, taking action, and then you want to stop and learn and absorb and experiment. So learning how to balance both of those at the same time, without letting either one slip, frankly, especially for growing teams that have really lengthy and really steep goals. So that's where I'm seeing a lot of the challenge. And I know we'll talk more about that today.
Yeah. I think a big question that a lot of teams have is just like, how are other teams adopting to AI? Like, where are they kind of in that process? And so those are some of the questions that the report I put together. Again, I had about 140 140, 150 content leaders responding to these different stats. So here's one that we found that I think kind of hits on that point is I asked teams about like where they felt like they were in the AI adoption. And so we had some about 32% were like, we're kind of experimenting. 38% were like, we've partially integrated. 17 was like full integration. And then some were like, we have no AI implementation at all. I actually talked to a large e-commerce brand at SEO week this week. And he was just saying like, I'm having a hard time getting AI like through approvals and through like governance and through legal even. And so they would probably fall like, you know, on the no AI implementation, for example. So you have all these different reasons for this, but first glance of this, does this like hit home for you guys or kind of what do you think about this?
Yeah, I actually feel like there's a step almost between experimental and partial where you've like your team's been in there, you've established some workflows, you've got this mindset shift from skeptical to exploratory, but the way that you broke down partial integration in the report and what it looks like, which is documented use cases, AI used regularly but not everywhere, I feel like that like going from step one to step two here, stage one to stage two is I think the biggest and the hardest leap. So I think the fact that both of those high bars are over on the left is definitely accurate of what we're seeing, but there's certainly this like middle ground between the two that I think more teams live in, whether they realize it or not.
There's also the difference between individual adoption and team adoption, which this report is centered around team adoption. And I think that's where one of the biggest gaps is. There's like a whole governance and process infrastructure that needs to happen in order to get teams to adopt this and let's say like productize or processize it. Right. The bedrock of this stuff is still great process and then great taste in terms of what outcomes you want from these systems. Whereas like the individual level, I would be surprised if someone hadn't tinkered a little bit with ChatGPT just for like personal use cases. So I would assume that adoption is quite high, but it's decentralized and maybe not getting operationalized into content workflows that result in deliverables. Thus, you know, it's not really like making a tangible difference in terms of like team productivity yet in some cases.
And there are probably some team members who they're okay in the ambiguous, right? Like I know that's where Alex and David and I live, and some of our team members who are like, I don't know how to do this, and that excites me. And then there are some team members who are like, I'm happy to do this, but I need some direction. And so it's like the two sides of the coin there, where you have like the early adopters, the ones that are excited by the unknown that you also need to help with. They need to help with documentation. They need to start writing down what they're learning and documenting at least like V1 of these SOPs, which I know you write, like the best teams build SOPs that define how they use AI. And I think that is how you activate the rest of the team who might not be as comfortable with that ambiguity. And that's how you move into that partial and then full integration.
Are you seeing like mentioning like different people's comfort levels with AI? Are you seeing teams like fearful or excited or just kind of like in between on this as far as like some of these changes go?
I haven't seen fear for over a year now. I know that was kind of the initial emotion, especially with writers. Like I think both of us have writing backgrounds, but I came up in content. And I think writers, it was like, where's my job going? Like, how do I compete? And now I think it's more of a skeptical, like, can this really do as good of a job as a human writer? Or will the QA take as much time as the writing just would have if I did it myself? So I don't think it's as much fear. I think it's more like skepticism and like, I'm not willing to pause my momentum to figure out how to use this. But I think that that's kind of that dichotomy I talked about in the beginning of like, it's worth slowing down to speed up in the long run. So it's shifting the mindset, like I said, from more skeptical to exploratory of like, wow, what is this capable of doing? And I'm excited to figure it out. Would you say it's the same, Alex?
Yeah, I liked
What
your
you've
phrase
seen?
there. I would say most people I talk to are skeptically optimistic. It's kind of a balancing act, but they believe that there's potential, but they haven't seen it yet. And then there are companies who I think have a lot of red tape and constraints organizationally to actually implementing this outside of just individual use cases. Like I would say enterprises across the board are doing internal tooling for AI in terms of like knowledge bases and discovery, Slack integrations and whatnot. But in terms of actual production output oriented workflows, like they've been slow to adopt those, and for probably good reason, right? The risk level is higher with I mean you've got more to lose as opposed to a 4-person startup. It's like the only loss function is essentially doing nothing. So you've got like all the upside and very low downside. So with those teams, we're seeing, I think, a lot more adoption and just like leaning into the uncertain, into the unknown. But it makes complete sense to me why some larger organizations would be a little bit slower to figure this stuff out. I think there's quite a bit of risk, especially if, quality control or, factual inaccuracies or any of those kind of like downside risks on the output side happen to them.
Right, right. I think that brings up this, I know, it's a nice segue to this for sure, because I think quality is one of the number one concerns that teams have. I think it's in the report a little bit later on, where quality assurance was like 80% of people's concerns. And what I tell people about that is that I think with AI, we always go straight to content. We always think about like, what is content from AI, instead of just thinking about some of the other ways that AI can help, as far as like outlines, research, content briefs, like automating some of this. And then you can still have, I mean, you can choose, right? You can have a writer write all the way from the brief, or you can have a first draft from an AI output. I think there's a spectrum there that teams aren't always aware of. They just jump straight to like, how good is this content and how good is this quality, when there's a lot of things in between there.
100%
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, Jeff.
I was going to say that the research component has been the biggest eye opener for me, both in terms of researching individual topics and also really synthesizing a ton of disparate research to then pull into a certain output, like your outlines or topic ideas. And we gather a lot of information from our clients. And when it comes to turning all of that into the work that we're doing, it just really helps connect all those dots. Thank you, Ryan.
My hot take
Yeah.
is I think maybe this is ironic, but the generative component of AI is actually one of the least interesting. And by that, I mean just like automating the generation of content and copy,
Right.
especially in the lowest art form, which is the LinkedIn comments, right? Automating your comments. It's like maybe just spend 2 seconds and say your real
No.
thoughts. But
Yeah, for sure.
even with a draft for a blog post, and I'm not saying it's entirely useless. Maybe there's an arbitrage opportunity to, consolidate definitional content for a glossary that would functionally be a waste of time to simply write it all out if you've got these resources that you can prompt against. But yeah, I think it's like the least interesting use case to generate a blog post or something like that. Much more interesting is what Allie said. You get ICP documentation, you get sales call transcripts, kickoff call transcripts from our clients. You pull all of this together, and then you can kind of build strategic components. You can identify wedges from a strategy standpoint as to like which customer questions are interesting, and then map those to keywords. You can synthesize individual topics and interviews into outlines. Like all of that makes, I think, the content outputs actually higher quality on the output side, as opposed to just like, how can I save time and publish 10x the amount of content and have it all be like marginally lower value,
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things on this slide I wanted to bring out was this idea that teams need new skill sets. I kind of mentioned that at the top, but are you seeing, just with the rise of AI, like teams like kind of lacking or need some upskilling in some of their areas to be able to like really harness some of the power of AI, like you were saying, Alex?
Yeah, I have a take on that. Allie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the soft skills for sure, mental, like a mentality around it, which I think is a skill set. But the hard skills, I know, Alex, you just wrote one of our newsletters about prompting and basically becoming like a really good conductor and orchestrator. Speak to that, because I think that's super interesting.
That's where I was going with this. And it's almost like two distinct skills that tend to be in the brains of different types of people in a company. So writers and editors and people from the humanities typically have very great vocabulary. They're articulate. That's their whole job. And I think being more articulate than average helps you get what you want out of these systems. To be able to say, um, the difference between I want a punk rock song and I want a 1970s punk rock song in the style of the Ramones that changes keys after the bridge, right? Like, to be able to describe very, very concretely what you want is obviously an emergent value in these systems. But then the flip side is this systems thinking, this process thinking, and that's where kind of the conductor or having the whole view of the orchestra, right? How do the this metaphor breaks down because I don't spend a lot of time in orchestras, but how do the horns work with the strings and how do the percussion work with, like, and which section needs to be louder or softer and which one's like a little bit fast tempo or something like that. And then figuring out like basically like a chef, like what is the ultimate product that you want to deliver? And then what are the subcomponents that kind of add up to the gestalt of what you're trying to build towards, right? So that's kind of a systems thinker. And I think those exist in SEO. A product manager is the perfect example, I think, archetypically of a systems thinker. And the blending of those two is where you get, I believe, Josh, your 10x content engineer. It's kind of those two systems, or systems. It's like the systems thinking with the articulation and the ability to prompt effectively and explain what you want out of these systems.
Yeah, for sure. Our website actually says orchestrate content on it. So I love that analogy for sure. But yeah, the idea of the content engineer is like, how do you move from like task to systems thinking in a lot of ways? Underlying that is like this builder mentality of like, I need to connect these two different workflows together. And that usually takes a little bit of like low code tooling, which again thinks or requires a different mindset and then even a different skill than the typical like content strategist, SEO, backlink, outreach person, all of these like kind of traditional roles that you may have.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, for example, I guess I'll give the secret away. I sometimes use a custom GPT to write newsletters and not to generate them, but like it's a background component of my work. And to effectively do that, I need to think first, what is a great newsletter? And a great newsletter from me, like what are the subcomponents? And I'm like, okay, there's stories, there's a core thesis. I weave those stories together. There's typically data that backs up these points. There's quotes. Like I have to kind of like deconstruct all of this and then accumulate those points and pull that all together. And then the GPT really helps me outline and pull it together in a cohesive structure. But I have to have that end vision. I can't just say, write me a newsletter,
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be like very specific and really grounded in like your background and your history. I'm sure you put in some like examples of your writing or some like other topics or even a podcast interview that you've done to be like, these are the topics I want to touch on. This is where my strengths and weaknesses are. You really have to identify those things. This is a slide from our report as well, and we touched on this a bit about how teams are using the technology, and is around content generation, SEO optimization, analytics, and reporting. So right now, we're seeing most teams are using AI for content generation. We have touched on some other ways, but what are some other ways that you've used AI workflows, either with teams or personally, to maybe do some of these other elements beyond content generation? Alex gave a really great example. Allie, do you have some others maybe from clients or just other use cases?
I mean, the research component, I guess, can be folded into the top two here, maybe the top one. We have trialed AI to put together some of our sales proposals. So it's been an interesting journey there. It again is not from a generative perspective, like we don't spit it out and send it on. It's more of like collecting all these disparate pieces of information and helping us pull all of this together to continue the conversation. That's still in the works. I would definitely say the strategy research, turning a lot of that into topics, activating outlines, all of that is definitely where we've seen the most value and where we've seen the most experimentation potential. Like we're having the most fun in that regard. We don't necessarily generate content using AI just because it's not the most interesting, nor is it the best use of our time. We haven't, have we built any workflow automation opportunities, Alex?
In AirOps for sure.
Well, in terms of like AI driven project management, I'd be curious, Josh, what have you heard in that regard?
Yeah, as far as the project management goes, I think it's really helpful if you have, in my case, like a list of keywords that you're trying to like build out a cluster for. And then you can create some workflows to have like the research behind it. And then also go ahead and start like, what are some other secondary keywords that this could cover? And then build a brief or an outline from those. You can do that at scale, like in AirOps, for example, beyond just going, I mean, because the old way used to be like what, like download your list from Ahrefs, manually go through there, combine a couple lists together. in your spreadsheet. And then you can do all of that in AirOps too. So that's really helpful. I'll hit on this a little bit later, but as far as SEO optimization goes, we've had a client, Descript, who had a huge lift, like 35% plus lift after they did a refresh of like meta titles, meta descriptions, and then like some other information at the top too. So the SEO optimization part is, I think, a huge opportunity for AI.
Yeah, we do a
Yeah.
lot on the keyword clustering side, which I guess previous to generative AI, you could have done via, K-means on, unsupervised learning clustering, but you've got a massive list of keywords, and even better if there's voice of customer, qualitative research from customer interviews and subject matter experts that you can consolidate in those topics. So that's a really nice way to speed things up. The sales GPTs are great. You can upload basically your information, so like Omniscient's ICP, our services menu, all of the information that basically we would put into a proposal. And then during a discovery call, you're basically asking, what are your strengths? What are your opportunity? You're implicitly asking like where they want to go. So you're kind of getting some vision questions, what their constraints and bottlenecks are, what they need the most help with, what the pain points are. So pulling all that together and then prompting against your knowledge documents gives you effectively like, where you're currently at, where you're going, what we propose strategically to get there, and then we can kind of fill out the rest of the deck with information. One other thing, I asked the team kind of the highest value, highest signal use cases, and I believe Nia had been implementing some editorial evaluations. So checking content drafts against brand and style guidelines, format and structure guidelines, and then also product factual information using, I think she said Perplexity was one of the most useful for that. So that's one that I'm a little bit distant from, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a great example for sure. Is like the research part is huge. And being able to think next about like how Claude differs from Perplexity and how that's different from ChatGPT for your different tasks, I think is like a next level that a lot of teams are going to be trying out and experimenting with.
I agree, Jessica.
Yeah.
uh, I just thought this was a great quote that somebody put in the report. I'll read it real quick. Content teams definitely need to evolve and change. AI is a tool. Not using it will make content teams uncompetitive, but using it poorly will make content teams unreliable and not credible. The key is to learn to use AI to structure and iterate on content without depending on AI to deliver quality, usable, reliable content on its own. I think really what we're getting there is a human in the loop is always necessary to really think through what's my differentiation, what's my point of view, is this like meeting my standards? And then editing, making changes either on the post or output level, but then maybe also in the system itself to really get to that great output.
Yeah. I think the best way that content marketers or content strategists, content writers can pivot with this is becoming kind of a hybrid journalist and growth strategist. So having a really strong grasp on what the customer is looking for, what their problems are, how they talk, how they think. So being very intertwined with sales and customer success, and also knowing who to go to get the subject matter expertise that you need. And this is something I trialed way back when at HubSpot. I actually used Alex as one of my first guinea pigs for what I thought was like this thought leadership series. So like, who knows the most about this topic? What are you working on? I want to help you write about it, which was a pretty fun but quite manual journey. And I feel like AI would have been the perfect tool to help me activate and speed up that series. And that's what we do with our agency is like, we get super, super immersed with the client, become an extension of their team. And then we're like, what do we want to talk about? What do you believe? Who knows best about this? And we go collect all this information. So SME interviews, which really activates our team as journalists. And then we just pull all of that together using AI as a tool. So we don't rely on AI to go figure out what is this client's POV. We pull all that in and then we have it help us connect those dots. And then we produce the content. So that's how I've tried to advise individual writers or content strategists to shift their thinking away from my value is writing and your value is gathering subject matter expertise and helping your company or your client meet their goals.
Yeah.
Talking to customers is still important. Yes.
Step one, know your audience.
Exactly.
Very listicle I ever wrote.
Let's touch on a bit on how like teams are changing and maybe how they do need to change. We mentioned like content engineers, that orchestration piece, that systems thinking. So in our research, we found that 48% of companies are adding AI specific roles like prompt engineers and content engineers. And then to your point, Allie just made this, there does have to be a balance between automation with editorial oversight. And then I wanted to ask you about how do you see teams reallocating their time, and even if you could speak to their headcount about like maybe they are shifting some of their resources from one area to another. Are you seeing any changes around that?
Yeah, um, definitely seen more budget open up around AI specific investments, whether that's tools or people or upskilling. So taking the team and upskilling them into prompt and content engineers or multiplying their skill sets. I think more investment in strategy analysis is never a bad thing. I think even those who are at the execution level should have a strong grasp on that anyway. So I don't necessarily disagree with the third box. Um, Alex, what have you seen in terms of some of your LLM conversations?
Well, at a high level, I think like how are teams reallocating time and headcount? It feels mostly actually the same today. Maybe like on the
Okay.
margins, like there's some slight differences, but team structures I think are actually the slowest to change, and then processes are what's changing within those. So I don't
Yeah.
necessarily see headcount changes happening yet. I think that may play out in the future. But what do you mean by the LLM conversations? You mean like GEO and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's just like a reallocation of like, I guess, goals and maybe budget towards what is ostensibly a new channel, but is effectively like somewhat similar in terms of what you're doing for GEO and, SEO and content. So again, I don't think headcount is necessarily changing on that. It's just people are looking more into how are we measuring our appearances in AI engines versus typical keyword rankings and search. So it's an emerging thing where people are trying to figure out like how this plays into their go-to-market.
Yeah. A really good note about headcount is maybe not changing, but like the skills are somewhat changing. Elisa Scharf from Seer Interactive was on a few weeks ago, and they were just talking about how they invested in some like AI courses and like certifications for their team. And then they also had like an AI, I think she called it an AI idea board, which was just like, hey, we may not be able to do this right now, but what are some processes and projects that we want to work on? And then they kind of put that in like a, parking lot or whatever to be able to like get to at a backlog to get to it at a different point. And I thought that was a really good idea to like encourage that thinking around like, how do we need to change our processes, even if they may not change like tomorrow, right? But what are some opportunities that we have?
Well, there's I think a need to be more cross-functional or holistic in your thinking
Mm,
and not operate in an SEO silo, which I believe was the case before. I don't think it was necessarily effective to go out and write a post called, how to create a shrug emoji from a business standpoint. So roping in well, actually, product marketing is probably emergently more valuable. So consolidating your messaging and positioning, across channels and across efforts and across pages, and really figuring out how you differentiate. Sorry, I guess Braden, you were there too. Yeah. It's the salient example. There's plenty of other examples of companies who are just operating off of, search volume prioritization. But yeah, product marketing and then, digital PR, how you're syndicating content, but really like focusing on like how are we differentiating our messaging and how does that play into our content strategy? And to that end, I think that content marketers and SEOs can probably end up spending more of their time gathering that proprietary data. And I say data very broadly, meaning that could be subject matter expert interviews, that could be podcast appearances and webinar appearances, that could be product sheets, spec sheets, competitor battle cards, like any data that is
mm,
unique to you and your company that you can use and leverage for the content creation mechanism. I think you can allocate some more of your time towards collecting and operationalizing those things, and a little bit less time, hopefully, thinking about like, how do I outline? How do I create a content brief? Like there's certain components that are more automatable than others or more table stakes than others.
yeah, for sure. Thanks, Meg from Sierra, who said we have an AI grab and go board to open innovative opportunities up for everyone. That is what I was referring to. Thank you. Uh, okay, let's kind of shift a little bit here. How are you seeing metrics, or how do you think teams maybe should change their metrics a bit as they're thinking about the AI era? I've personally been thinking more about brand impressions instead of just like straight traffic visits and click-through rates. There could be some shifting cost of content. We touched on that a bit. And then, of course, the AI efficiency angle. So what metrics are you chatting with your clients about what they should be looking at these days?
Yeah. That's Allie, you were talking about that before. That's something we're thinking about a lot. In any sort of measurement model, you're approximating what the real world activity is and like what you can actually track. And hopefully it's like as close and precise as possible. In the AI world, it's less precise and there's less information precision. So my mental model so far is like map towards the most important metrics, which would be leads, pipeline, incremental revenue, et cetera. And one of the best ways to do that, not the most precise ways, but one of the best ways right now is just self-reported attribution. It's the highest signal for us. We've talked to past clients, we've talked to current clients. They're getting additional color in terms of how people are finding them, especially if you have a form field that says, how did you discover us? Somebody says ChatGPT, you get a salesperson on the call and they follow up and say like, well, what did you prompt? What did you, you get a little bit more specific on like where you're actually appearing in those systems. And then you can do some causal analysis to figure out like what the incremental pipeline or revenue is from those sources. Back up one layer, if you're using Google Analytics 4, you can obviously do referral traffic from different systems, ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, et cetera. Those help stack rank kind of the highest impact surface areas, which almost always is ChatGPT according to our data. And then one layer back is how you're appearing in these systems, like which AI overviews include you as a citation or you mentioned in. There's tools like Peak AI, Profound, tons of tools now. And they're effectively sampling or they're hitting a prompt like say 1,000 times and then giving you an average visibility score. So you appear in 600 out of 1,000, 60% visibility, and then they're giving you a little bit more clarity in terms of what citations are appearing. So you can start to think through like how you can get into those, how you can partner with those companies, et cetera. That's the loosest form of data right now. We actually don't know, in the traditional paradigm, it's like how many people search a keyword. There's rough estimates for like 10,000 people a month search for best CRM software. We can't approximate that to prompts because they're a lot more conversational and there's a way higher variance in terms of how people are using those systems. But that's my kind of 3-layer measurement model at this point. Things will change. That's one of the main takeaways from the AI era is things will change.
Yeah, for sure. I think a really important note there too is a lot of times the bottom funnel and like mid funnel content is really surfacing up in these LLM models more so than like the type of what is content where they already have a repository of answers. So if you're looking to appear in those, having that like unique data set, that really recency bias essentially that they have is really important. And then if you're doing a comparison, say like XYZ CRM versus ABC CRM, you're gonna see some like product reviews and stuff like surface there as well, and not really like the what is a CRM type. You won't get cited for that usually. I think that is a really good system that Alex described there. Are you seeing anything around like, or maybe we can just spitball a bit here, like how maybe could we measure like AI efficiency and like saving time on that?
I haven't thought as much about that one. What do you think, Allie?
I guess if we're thinking about like time time to creation, I mean, I guess I'm thinking of two different teams. Like we're an agency, so we're thinking like utilization metrics, we're thinking whatever, like how much everyone can work on. And I think it's a similar approach for in-house teams, but I guess I'll speak to more of the agency team structure. I've taken a look at our team utilization, how that trickles down into the individual responsibilities and what kind of projects they're working on, and then like speed to execution. And speed for the sake of speed is not my favorite thing, so that's not what I'm speaking to, but it's more so with all of these tools and all of these systems that we're building and we're working very hard to document, how is that helping us move faster without sacrificing quality? So I don't necessarily have a specific metric for you, Josh, but in terms of thinking about how quickly our team can move, how quickly our team can iterate on prompts and outputs, and then how we can reallocate time towards more of the manual tasks or the things that should be manual. So spending time with SMEs and customers, spending time with clients, the stuff that we never really want to automate or outsource to an AI tool, and prioritizing those things by becoming more efficient on the AI front. And like Alex said, moving away from like spending a lot of time on briefing or spending a lot of time on keyword research and stuff like that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about how it trickles down to where our team is spending a lot of their time and what is the most valuable stuff for them to be working on.
Yeah, I guess we haven't done this in detail yet, but I guess you could calculate kind of throughput metrics. So sort of the velocity of deliverables. Like if you know your systems and your processes really well, I'm imagining like a restaurant where there's, let's say, a menu and a set amount of meals, and with AI, maybe you could add an additional meal. Like, a restaurant gets an ice cream machine and now they can serve ice cream. So that's incremental on top of what you were currently making, which is hamburgers or something. And then there's a sort of throughput. You were doing 10 before, now you're doing 20. So that's incremental efficiency. And then there's maybe a pass fail metric in terms of quality, like a threshold that you need to hit, which is like acceptance of those meals. So how many are sent back to the kitchen or something like that. And it's all metaphorical, obviously. And then if you had an extra machine to make ice cream, you calculate like the cost of that. And maybe if that displaces like hiring an additional freelancer or something like that. So you can do cost calculations up front as well. But that's a very, I guess, generic system. It would have to apply specifically to an individual team and what your sort of meal is. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm just
for
riffing.
sure. I've been thinking about like, and it's kind of hard to do now because I'm kind of using a lot of these processes every day at AirOps, but it's also like, what was the time to like research this? And now it's taking me this amount of time, and it's not going like, it's not going to eliminate all manual processes, but if it eliminates like 10 to 20% of that time, that's like a savings. And then that savings like compounds, right? If you do that over several different processes, if you save 10 to 20% of your time on each of those processes, that's like a huge amount over the lifespan of, say, like a social media campaign or a topic cluster that you're putting together. So
Yeah.
I encourage folks not to think about this as like 0 to 100% like automation, but there's definitely, ways that you can cut down on some of those production times.
Or even, is it expansionary as well? Like there's the time savings. And I think a lot of the like products we use are going to start integrating AI, and they already have in their systems. But, you record a podcast or a webinar, and maybe in the past you had to cut manual clips and hire an editor to do so.
Yeah.
And now maybe it's not perfect, but you have a magic clip tool that can automatically cut clips. So that saves you time. But then maybe there's an additional augmentation function where you can take those clips, pull that through a workflow, and then repurpose that using, custom training and your voice and style for LinkedIn, for TikTok, and for Instagram, all of which have different formats and optimization tactics to get distributed on those platforms. So now it expands your overall capacity to distribute the content as well.
To do other things. Yeah, for sure. I wanted to get to this technology. This is the one I was thinking about here, was like, this was from our research report, like what are the most time consuming content processes? And we really touched on this, is like research and ideation takes up a lot of time. So is there a way to use AI workflows to cut that down? Outlining and drafts, editing and approvals, and then publishing and distribution. People say it doesn't take as much time, but maybe they should be spending more time on that anyway. So I think if you kind of, to Alex's point, shorten the amount of time it takes on research and ideation, first drafts, even the approval process, you can spend more time down here at that publishing and distribution level.
I swear that's the part that takes me the longest. Ideation, I'm full of ideas.
Well, you're like a top 1% content marketer, so you're just like you're repurposing all your stuff. So
Thank you.
Yeah. I know we're kind of moving towards the last half here. One of the things we've been talking about is this content engineer. And so I really like Owen, our head of growth, put this together, but he found this tweet from somebody, another Allie Miller. She says, the AI skills gap isn't about coding or prompt engineering. It's about systems thinking, which you really hit on. And I like how she thinks about business process knowledge, the growth mindset, and AI knowledge to become a systems thinker. So if you layer on that content engineering idea, you do need to have a blend of like technical, but also just a willingness to like tinker and try things, which I think comes a little bit more to maybe a programmer or something like that, where they're like, oh, I need to debug this. That's not always in the like content strategist like mindset, I think. But also you need to have a desire to kind of be ahead of that curve and to like figure out some of this stuff on your own.
I'll double down on that. I actually think that the idea that there's a perfect prompt or you need a prompt library is not the right way to think about this. I actually think the ability and the willingness to tinker is way more important in actually pushing these systems and figuring out new ways to use them.
Yeah, we
So I
talked about
totally
this
agree.
in a podcast episode a couple weeks ago, where I don't know the word that you used, Alex, but it was just this concept of like there's not a right answer, like there's not an ideal outcome. In terms of getting comfortable with the unknown, kind of going back to that ambiguity, that is where the most learning and the most opportunity comes from, is just tinkering, prompting, iterating on your prompts and asking it to do things that you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. Like, let's just see what comes out of this. And maybe it'll generate a whole new direction or it'll give me even more ideas. But it's getting like really hands-on and being okay, not really knowing what's going to come out the other side, that I think the most learning and the most process of getting comfortable comes through.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you got to go out to the wilderness, have your vision quest, and then come back to the village and tell the tribe what you've learned, as opposed to like trying to predict all these prompts up front. You got to go just explore
And
for
then go work in a
yourself.
kitchen.
Yeah, and then orchestrate, lead an orchestra as well. Take that frontier mindset and tinker for sure. And then kind of bleeding into that, where do you think kind of the market is going in some ways? What are you seeing on the horizon here? Any hot takes on
Large
that?
question, Josh. Huge question. If I'm thinking in terms of content teams, like if I was a content lead or director, definitely diversifying the skill set of my team, really seeing what they're capable of, potentially before I add on new roles. Obviously, if you're a growing team and you're building for the first time, making sure you have people who are comfortable with prompt engineering and all of that as part of the team. I would say continuing to push on those efficiency metrics that we talked about and maybe figuring out what is most important for my team to do manually. I'm using that phrase in opposition to AI, but I know manual, it's not always the right one. Like, what do we want to protect? What do we want to make sure like that we're a part of? What kind of conversations do we want to continue to have? And then what can we test and experiment with and automate? And then continuing to QA and be very strict about that QA, like that QA process. So Alex mentioned like one of our team members, Nia, is trying to measure QA through AirOps. And I think starting to build systems to kind of check your work, that is a really good process to build. So it's not just like, let's just do a bunch of output and then move on. It's like, what are we learning? What's working, what's not working, and how are we going to put that back into the prompt? That's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of what is going to come next, or what I would do if I was building.
Yeah, love that. The QA process for sure. And like iterating on what your learnings are and then incorporating that into the process.
I think a lot of investments that folks make, there's like you invest in the tool, you build up the team, you train the team, and then you move and you go, and then you keep moving on and you keep growing. But I think AI is really unique in that it's this like flywheel effect, and the more that you really analyze what the output is, understand what's working for the team and for your goals, right? For your customers or your conversion goals or whatever your team's building on, and then putting that time back into the system, I think that's really where you get the value. Like it's a never done investment, in my opinion, because it's not only changing all the time, like Alex said, but it's capable of so much, and you'll only really unearth all of that if you keep kind of going back to the drawing board and also pulling on all of your team's knowledge and creativity. Like, I think that's really where creativity can come into play, is like, what have you tried? What are you learning? Oh yeah, let's try this next. So it's not just this one way street or one way output, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I'm also, it's obviously impossible to predict the future, but what I think about is how user behavior changes, how attention may reallocate based on different tools coming out, and maybe the ability to create more content increases the supply. So like demand is kind of constrained by your attention, but it's going to reallocate to different resources potentially. So I'm always thinking about like what is valuable, right? And there's a sort of approximation of value with scarcity, or what is maybe harder to find. So like the old days, you could kind of arbitrage answers through an ultimate guide or a what is page, build some links to that page, outrank your competitors, get traffic, and hopefully convert some of that to an ebook and put them in a nurturing sequence. I think those answers are so easy to come across. It's like the accessibility now is basically frictionless. So what is valuable? Being a credible source. How do you invoke credibility through some of the stuff we had talked about before? Really leaning on subject matter experts. I think even some of the founder brand and like leading with a face as opposed to a nameless entity is more credible. Indexing on proprietary data, unique data sets, original research. We're seeing more and more clients want that and do well with that, especially getting airplay in tools like deep research and agentic workflows like that. And then the brand stuff is becoming so much more important as a former growth marketer. I hate to say it, but it's like your brand affinity, your brand ubiquity in certain channels and surface areas. So we've talked about the surround sound SEO strategy and getting citations and mentions, and that's such a cross-functional endeavor. And even some of the stuff that's harder to track, but kind of builds goodwill and brand awareness, like the print magazine that you showed before, Josh. Like I think those things are also going to be probably emergently important too. But yeah, I'm thinking like what is scarce, what is valuable, and how can we index on those resources?
Yeah, love that. Those are great takeaways for sure. Oh, yes, we've been talking about like content engineering and what that kind of looks like. So I wanted to show this workflow that Kevin Indig actually put together, and it's a content cannibalization workflow. So this is for the deep SEO nerds out there who want to understand, like, this is an example of what you can really do with not only AirOps, but just like what content engineering is. So let me stop this share and then bring this over. And we are talking about the state of content teams report. So that's what you see here. But here is the content cannibalization workflow. And so as an example, I put in this blog URL, which is from toasttab.com, and I asked it to show me all of the different potential keyword overlaps or pages that may be competing against this. And so it suggested that 4 competing pages are ranking for 6 different keywords. Here's some specific examples of some potential pages that are at risk. And then here are some keywords from this site that also may be at risk for cannibalization. So thought this was a really helpful tool. It's part of AirOps workflows and power steps that we have now. So you can take your own page or a client's page and then like run it through this particular workflow, and it'll tell you like, how you rank and stack against each other on some of your own pages. This is really great for sites with a lot of different pages and content that you may not even be aware of. Yeah, super in depth here. And then another one I wanted to show was a social post generator. I call it the best social post generator ever grid. And so again, this is an AirOps, and this is something a content engineer or a content strategist on your team can build. For example, we have this post type that you want. This is for a LinkedIn post. And then I put in the state of content teams report into AirOps. And I have this output, 3 different outputs of different type of blog or social posts that I could use. So it's in different formats in different ways. So what I did is I took elements of these and then reposted this on LinkedIn. Here's another one talking about content marketing and how to leverage unique value, original research, structuring your content, a lot of what Alex just mentioned there. So yeah, so those are some examples that you can use with AirOps to build out new content workflows. This is what we mean when we're talking about content engineers. This is a lot different than like when I first started in content marketing and SEO for sure.
The social grid right here, I see you have a tab for Alex and a tab for Matt. Do you have different like voice and tone references in a knowledge base for them so that the posts read a little bit differently?
Yes, for sure. I also have a company one. So
Nice.
Alex Halliday is our founder, Matt, actually both of them are founders, CEO, COO, and then I also have a tab for sales, which I haven't quite done as much here. But yeah, you can go over to your data, and then you can see I have an AirOps, one for Alex using LinkedIn posts, one's for Matt, and then one for the sales team. And then we actually have this LinkedIn post hook templates where we took different templates that have proven popular over the years, and then we're able to upload that into AirOps as well.
Very cool.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Let me go back over to our deck over here. If you have any questions about that, feel free to drop that in the workflow, or I'm sorry, in the chat. The workflow is something different. Just trying to find. Can you guys see my, what do you see right now?
See, Josh Bilker started screen sharing.
I was trying to bring up our,
screen sharing.
I was trying to bring up our deck again, but yeah, why don't we move into an FAQ here? Maybe I'll get that back together. If you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat and then we can address it. Who has any questions here? If I am using, let me see. Yeah, well, why don't you guys maybe mention a couple of workflows that I think you've said that you've used AirOps a little bit for some content briefs. Is that correct?
Concept
Yeah.
briefs is one of our first use cases. Yeah.
Yeah, we our content briefs are similar, you know, to a normal content brief, but we have a couple components that are quite, I guess they've historically been quite manual. So like, how does the client fit into the conversation? You know, why do they have authority to write about this topic? What about their product or their audience is relevant? And then also how are we going to differentiate this piece of content from what else is on the SERPs? So those two components, we've been testing how to, again, pull from all of our resources, the brand kit, the knowledge base, as well as research through AirOps, and how do we complete those components of the content brief in addition to the outline. So that's been the most, I think, interesting experiment the team's been running, because the outline, you know, we've iterated on that a couple times. I think we're on version like 13 of that workflow, but then layering on these like value add components has been a really cool use case. Content optimization brief. So how are we going to optimize a current URL versus sourcing information for a net new topic? What else, Alex? We have a lot of workflows.
Isn't Usman building one right now for automating similarly portions of the SEO and content model? So
Yes.
we have a artifact that is essentially a historical portfolio audit, content inventory of sorts that you come up with optimization opportunities, you know, technical internal link, on page, all of that stuff. I haven't dug into exactly which components are being automated, but again, it's like there's some that require a lot of taste and judgment, and then others that are simply a probabilistic outcome that is relatively, it's like, you know, synthesizing SERP data or something like that and figuring out like what the intent is or something like that. So he's chipping through and figuring out which columns in that document can be automated.
Yeah, I love those use cases. That's, I mean, once you start playing around with it, it's like so many different directions that you can go. We had a client here, Descript. They were able to do like a content refresh. So they had all of these pages that they needed to optimize and update. And once they were able to bring in AirOps, they had a 35% increase to those pages through organic visits. And then we're just able to do it like so much faster. So it's, again, not just about like net new content. It's like building these processes and then thinking about how you can like optimize and refresh as well. If you are interested in trying out AirOps and learning more about how to upskill your team for content engineering, feel free to drop us a note, team@airops.com. Happy to put that together. Just mention this webinar, or you can scan that QR code over there and you will get your SEO acceleration session. So really stoked to talk to everybody about that. And then, yes, here is my Q&A slide that I was trying to find a little bit earlier. Let me see if we have any. Owen, I think you're on. Do you have any questions in the chat? Let me see what we got here.
Let's look. We have one from Ryan, which is around when I have clients that just start with a keyword and start writing about it without a larger strategy. It always makes me nervous. How can I maybe uh, get around that issue from the get-go with setting up the right like briefing and strategy session?
I see he had a question before that around how companies are using AI for strategy, like the initial part that precedes
Yeah.
clustering and research. Oh, what would you say, Alex?
Pretty heavy question.
It is a heavy
It's
question. Honestly,
what is strategy after all?
um,
We model it out. We want to build a forest, not an individual tree. You want your brand to be the go-to source for a given topic or topics, depending on what you sell. So it really starts with the multi dimensional research process. The base layer for us is always the ICP or the prospect or the buyer, understanding what they want, what they care about, what their fears, their goals, their dreams, their hesitations are, and very concretely the way they describe these things. And then we triangulate that with the product, the market, the industry that you're in, kind of the technical details and how you differentiate. And then we layer on keywords or queries or whatever way you can stack rank that and optimize for a channel, which is typically SEO for us. So
mhm.
we want to build out like a comprehensive topic map that all relates. It all hits kind of the center of the bullseye of these three elements. So
Yeah.
yeah, what would you add, Allie?
Well, when I think about growth strategy, I feel like I'm standing at like a control board and figuring out what levers to pull based on my understanding of like a SWOT analysis as well as product and people, and then the search atmosphere that they would be competing in. So when I think like before keywords and clustering, I think, how can I help this company organically connect with the people who want to buy or invest or whatever in what they're selling. So I just think about like what levers I'm pulling on, what programs I want to run, which is typically through content creation of some sort. But there's also a lot of different avenues to go down. And I think AI has helped me connect those dots, but I will say the inputs beget the outputs. So unless you have a very thorough discovery call, a lot of thorough resources shared by the client or the team or even your company that you're working at, AI just can't do that thinking for you, but it can certainly help connect the dots. And then according to your approach or how your company thinks about growth or SEO, then you can prioritize, like what Alex said.
It's really amazing though if you collect the information from calls and even the website. It is really amazing at kind of expanding on your initial assumptions of what topics you would write about and coming up with almost like people also asked or related topics, and you can cluster those under one page, but it can also give you the root level kind of roadmap building, and then obviously you've got to go in and like run your own prioritization models, fill out all of the details, and figure out how that all fits together. Like, should this set of keywords be a programmatic library of templates, or should it be a product page, or should it be a blog post, and how does that all fit together in our go-to-market? So there's obviously a pretty heavy human hand that has to go into the judgment here. But I run a lot of prompts through to start my kind of research.
Yeah, love that. Maybe I'll touch on Braden's question here quickly. Differences in SEO priorities between Google and average LLM. I would say I've been listening and learning a lot about this recently. It's a lot of new content. And so, and it is middle and bottom funnel content. We touched on that a little bit earlier. Anything new you can give to a new perspective, but also like new reviews and such, those seem to be appearing in LLMs a little bit more. Also, just your schema has to be pretty sharp to appear in LLMs. And then the question and answer format seems to be picking up pretty well in LLMs from my experience. But to Alex's earlier point, sometimes these queries are just completely different. So usually you're going to have a shorter query in Google, whereas like you're going to have a paragraph prompt of something in like ChatGPT for something that people are searching for. All that to say is there are differences between the two, but right now there's like a lot of overlap between like what appears on page one in Google and what's showing in LLMs. I just heard a talk on that on Monday, but at the same time, like eventually I think those things are gonna like diverge a bit more. Yeah, cool. Thank you, Allie and Alex, for joining. I really appreciate it. Find everybody on LinkedIn and connect. check out Omniscient, check out AirOps and our State of Content Teams report, and really excited to get on a strategy session with some of you as well. So until next time, we'll be here on May 15th with Nick Leroy. He's a really great SEO consultant, so that'll be in a couple weeks. Allie, Alex, anything you guys want to promote or have coming up?
Nothing really. We have a podcast called The Long Game. You can find that on our website, and I run a newsletter every week. Still got to finish
Sounds
mine for
great.
tomorrow.
Yeah, if you all have any questions about anything we shared or any way that we're tinkering ourselves, you can always hit us up on LinkedIn or X. I guess Alex is still on X, or email.
I just still use it from time to time.
Happy to help with anything.
Yeah. Email us, ask us. We have magazines. We can send magazines out.
Yes.
There you go. Well, it was great to talk with both of you and to see you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Josh.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
ya.